Today you've reached Jack Lett of all trades and master of none. I'm going to talk today, which I'm good at. Everybody can tell. Today's March 17th, I believe, 16th of 2021. I lose track of time because I don't go anywhere. I stay at home all the time, so it's really hard to pay attention of the days going by, other than when my grandson goes to school. So I'm going to tell you a story about Sasquatch or Bigfoot. This goes back many years ago. I had a great experience, well, scary experience at the time, but I've told this story so many times, and most of my kids have heard it time and time again. But I figured I'd put it down on tape. So this goes back to the spring of 1982. I had moved into my parents' house while my house was ready next door. I was moving a new house on to a basement, and I had all kinds of things to do, so it took time. But anyhow, my son and I moved in with my mom and dad for a couple months till this was done. One night, I came home from work. I worked the evening shift that particular time, 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off with my mom. We had a business, RSB Enterprises. As a matter of fact, we had a catering business that we did, and that's another story. But anyhow, I came home about 11:30, 12 o'clock, and by the time I, piddled around and got things done, I got into bed probably well after 1. And I had two little dogs with me that lived with me at the time, Buttons and Brandy. They were a little Pomeranian and a little terrier, cross terrier. So they were always in the foot of my bed with me. So I was reading, trying to just relax, get ready for bed. And all of a sudden, the dogs perked their ears up and they jumped up and they started, rrr, 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 rrr. And Jesus, stop barking. Everybody's sleeping. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. So I stopped them, but as I had stopped them, I had heard a sound out in the distance, about west of the house, quite a ways, probably a mile away. It's in my mind, anyhow. I didn't know for sure, but it was a very low sound. It started off just like that. It wasn't like a coyote would be. I mean, I was born and raised in the country. I know what all the animals sound like. I know what the birds sound like. So it kind of took me back, but anyhow, I laid back down and continued to read, and all of a sudden I saw the dog's ears perk up again, and this time I jumped up and I sat up and I stopped him from barking as much as I could, and I heard it very clearly this time. In the distance, I could hear a very low, low sound, and that's how the dogs heard it first, of course. Very low, and then it went up very, very high. And gosh, I was beside myself. I didn't know what the heck that was. So the next morning I got up and I told the family, this is what I heard. And everybody said, it's just a coyote, it was just a fox, it was just this, and it was this, that. And I said, no, I heard something that I've never heard before. So everybody just kind of, heard it, said, okay, yeah, right. And that was the end of it. About a week later, my dad had wanted to drive up the road to a different part of the land, and he had put my son, he was 6 at the time, on the back of the pickup truck, into the box. So he was driving slowly. So he went up and he did what he needed to do up in the field, and he came back. And as he was coming back down the road, he saw in the distance, probably about 1,000 feet, something was coming out of the bush west of the house or driveway, and it came up the steep ditch. It was probably about a 10-foot ditch, and came up the ditch and went across the road. But when he was looking at it, he couldn't figure out what the heck it was. It kind of reminded him, well, it wasn't a moose. It was high in the front and low in the back, but he couldn't figure out what the heck it could be. And he watched it. It was brown, it was furry, and it kind of was walking on all fours. And it came up the ditch and across the road and then into the back of the bush behind the garage and the barn, which was north of where the house was. So again, he couldn't rush because the little guy was in the back seats. In the back of the truck. So he slowly finally got into the yard and he got out of the truck. And we had two cattle dogs at that time, a shepherd and a collie. And he called for them. He said, Duke, Tip, go get him. And he pointed to behind the back of the barn there, and the dogs perked their ears up and took off like a shot. And within 2 or 3 minutes, they were right back. And that's not That's not what these dogs did. They've tackled cougars and bobcats and coyotes and wolves. They weren't afraid, but they got out of that bush so fast. My dad was shocked. So he walked in himself some, and the dogs wouldn't, I mean, they stayed with him, but they wouldn't come any further than where he was. So that between my sounding, hearing the sounds, and his seeing something, we had a story that we started. Everybody came, whoever came for a visit, we'd tell the story. It was a big ho 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 laugh kind of thing. But one of the neighbor kids down the road, a couple miles down the road, I'll call him Jack. That's not his name, but I'll use that word. He said, well, if there's something there, I'm going to find it. I'm sure there'll be tracks. So I'm going to take my gun, my rifle, 22, whatever he had, and I'm going to go into the back and through those pits. There's all kinds of sand and gravel, and then the pits end at a big plowed field. So he took days, and he'd go in the evening, which I would scare the heck out of me. I wouldn't have wanted to done that, but he went, towards dusk. It's not quite dark yet, but maybe an hour before dusk, he'd go traveling and looking. So this one particular time, he found the tracks. And he said he followed them out of the pit. He he found them in the gravel, in the sand, in the mud, and then he followed them. And they went up over a ridge and then into the plowed field. And he found a really good track. So he said, come on, I'll show you. They're here. Let's go. So off we went. And this was probably in like the next day. It wasn't that night, around noon, 11 o'clock in the morning. So we went out and saw them, and sure enough, there were tracks. They looked like human feet, though way bigger and way deeper. They were approximately 18 inches long from heel to toe, top of the toe, and about 9 inches wide at the widest part of your foot, and probably to 3 to 4 inches deep. So that lent itself to describe a very tall being that was quite heavy. And it took 2 or 3 steps on its full foot impressions, and then it went down on all fours. Now, one of the fellows that had come with us to look at the tracks was about 6'4", I don't know, 280 pounds. I don't know how much he weighed, but anyhow, he put his foot right beside the impression of the heel, and tried and compared his foot. He had a 14-inch foot boot, so and they were bigger. So there was no question in our mind that they were at least 18 inches, and he had to leap from one step to the other to be able to take that foot. Now, whether this being was actually running at the time, we didn't know, but anyhow. When he left his feet and went on all fours, it was like his front feet were his fists. So they were impressions like this in the soil. You could see the fist and the finger marks. So, and then it went right across the field, a mile of an open field, and it went. You can see the distance between the front and the back feet were quite a ways. So he was like galloping like a horse, I guess. I don't know. I didn't see it, but this is our impression of the footprints. So Dad said, well, we're going to call the police. We'll call the RCMP and see what they have to say about what this is here. So the RCMP came, and they took the impressions. They took casts. They measured. And then said, okay, Mr. Terrace, thank you very much. And my dad said, what do you mean? That's it? He says, well, aren't we, going to discuss this? What do you think it is? And RCP said, well, as far as we're concerned, sir, he said, they're wild horses. And my dad was beside himself. What do you mean wild horses? He says, can't you see it? He says, well, if you want high-powered rifles, coming, searching for some kind of animal around your farm or your family's farm, go ahead and tell people. But he says, I would suggest you don't. So we thought about it for a while and said, yeah, that's probably a good idea not to say much more about this, other than the legend began. And then about maybe 2 weeks later, towards the end of May already, I had moved into my house with my son, and we were outside throwing the ball around. He was facing his back to the house, and I had my back to the field where we had seen those impressions. He threw me the ball, and I missed it, and then went flying behind me. So I turned around and I started walking towards where the ball was. I picked the ball up and I said to myself, just to myself, I wasn't allowed. I just said, I wonder what your name is. And with full force, never experienced it before in my life, there was like a fist hit my forehead. And the thought was, I am Etka. It was such a strong thought that I took a step backwards because it pushed me back with the force of it. So I recognized, okay, this is how they get away. This is how people don't see them. This is why they've lived so long unknown and unannounced, because they are so psychic, perhaps coming in and out of dimensions into the second plane. Who knows what they do? But I understood then that's what they were. This was a female that had spoken to me in my head very clearly, and I was very impressed. And that pretty much ended our story. We never heard from it again, other than years later, this young Jack fellow swears that he has them in his bush. By his yard. Now, when he, a little part of the story I had forgot to tell you, when he had been hunting, he'd go home every night with his rifle, and he had, in the yard, he had a female dog with her litter of pups, probably about 6, that were already just about full grown. They're about 6 months old. And every night when he went home, it was like something followed him. And he'd get into the house, and then the dogs at night, as the sun set, the dogs would go wild. They'd bark and bark and bark at the bush, like they'd make like a U shape around the house, but they never went into the bush. And they were all very, good dogs, that they would have gone after something, and they never did. So this young fellow, Jack, was pretty sure whatever he was tracking him. So I think that's why probably years later they ended up in his back bush, which is a bit of a reserve out there for animals and such. And he's taken pictures of the nest, which looks like a deep, like a deer would indent grass, and they created an area for themselves. I haven't seen it. Other people have, and suggested that, yeah, maybe something could be there, but I don't know. So the mystery goes on, and if you believe in these things, so be it. If you don't, I don't care. I know what I saw. I know what I felt, and it's very interesting to realize and understand that there are other things in this world that we really don't know and can't explain. Well, so that's about it for today. I have set some eggs for chicks, and I'm going to take a short video of that to get you to see what it looks like, and I'll follow the chicks as well, and I'll also show you my plants. That'll be the next video. So you have a good day, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks for coming. Bye.